Yes, I understand that the Halloween season has come to an end, but we still have more movies in this franchise to review, and I'm not putting them off until next year. So we're going to continue on with the Universal Monsters, and just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to use this same title card. Hey everyone, it's Alexander Robinson. Welcome to the channel, and this is my retro review for House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, which came out in 1944 and 1945 respectively. This is going to be another instance where I'm doing a double feature review, because with both movies, I don't think there's really a whole lot to talk about with them individually. And plus, they're practically one and the same, involving the same plot, same story structure, same outcome, even the same crew. I figured it's probably better to just talk about both these movies in one video. So we're going to start off with House of Frankenstein, which came out in 1944 and stars Boris Karloff as Dr. Niemann, a scientist who was an admirer of Dr. Frankenstein and was thrown into jail for trying to recreate his experiments. While in prison, he meets and befriends a hunchback named Daniel, who becomes his assistant, and Dr. Niemann tells Daniel that he's going to give him a new body via brain transplant. So one night, their chance at escape comes, and Dr. Niemann comes across Dracula, who he uses to enact revenge against the people that threw him in jail. He then encounters the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman buried in ice after the events of the last movie, and tells Larry Talbot that his werewolfism can be cured via brain transplant. And then you also have this gypsy dancer who is thrown into a love triangle between her, Daniel, and Larry Talbot. And the result is basically a poor man's Destroy All Monsters. If Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was the Universal monster equivalent to King Kong vs. Godzilla, then both House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula are the Destroy All Monsters equivalent. Now, Destroy All Monsters is not a perfect Godzilla movie. It's not one of my favorites, but it has its full share of highlights where you get to see all these monsters on the same screen interacting with each other, and that big fight with Ghidorah at the end makes it all worth it. House of Frankenstein is not really like this at all, because while it does have 3 of the Universal monsters, they're not really used to full effect. In fact, Dracula is only in the first act of the film. He's played by John Carradine, who is fine. He doesn't really leave that much of an impression as Dracula, especially considering how iconic Bela Lugosi is. And he honestly dies within the first act. Then the second half directly follows the events of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, but even then, when it comes to the Wolfman and the Frankenstein monster, they don't share any scenes together this time around. The Frankenstein monster is only revived at the end of the movie, when everything's starting to wrap up, and up until that point, we're focused on Larry Talbot once again. So when I say it's a poor man's Destroy All Monsters, I mean that in the sense that none of the monsters actually encounter one another or interact with each other. That's probably the only major issue I have with the movie, and I think it is a pretty big one, considering this movie was marketed as having these 3 monsters. But on the plus side, this movie has some nice continuity with Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, where you get to see the remains of the castle after it was wiped out by the flood. And it actually makes sense that both these monsters survive. First, the Frankenstein monster, because he's immortal, but also Larry Talbot. It makes sense that he would survive as well, because it never made sense that he would die from a flood when a Wolfman can only be killed by something silver. So out of all the horror sequels where they bring the monster back, this is probably the one where I look at and go, yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense that he would be back. And Lon Chaney Jr. is basically doing the same thing that he did in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And there's not really much else to his performance that can be said. As for the monster, since Boris Karloff is playing Dr. Niemann, he cannot play the monster. So instead, we have Glenn Strange, who he looks like the Frankenstein monster, But there are points where I just couldn't help but think of Herman Munster from The Monsters. And this is especially a big problem when we get to Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. I think he does a better job than Lon Chaney Jr. and Bela Lugosi did when they played the monsters. He's more expressive, he's more energetic, but because he's not in the movie for very long, you don't have the same emotional sympathy that you would when Boris Karloff played the character. So while I think this movie completely fumbles the ball with its monster characters, the thing that really carries this movie, though, are the new characters. Boris Karloff is really good in this role. It may be disappointing that he's not playing the Frankenstein monster, but he's effective as a mad scientist. Dr. Niemann is just this scheming, selfish, let's say jackass, who is promising all these people certain things, but he'll disregard them when he finds that they're not useful to him. That's actually how Dracula dies. Dr. Niemann agrees to basically keep Dracula's coffin secure, but when there's a chase with the cops, the coffin gets tossed to the side, and Dracula is unable to get to it in time before the sun rises. And he also betrays Larry Talbot, he betrays Daniel. He's just such a great villainous character. But funny enough, I don't think he's actually the most evil person in this movie. No, the most evil person in the movie, and probably the most evil character in all the Universal Monster films, is the gypsy dancer, Ilonka. The reason I say that is because her love triangle between her, Larry Talbot, and Daniel the Hunchback is so irritating. Daniel saves Ilonka from a whipping from her boss, and she is first taken back by Daniel because he's a hunchback. But she starts to develop feelings for Daniel up until Larry Talbot arrives, and she starts fawning for him, and it just makes this character so incredibly shallow. And when she is told by Daniel that Larry Talbot's dangerous because he turns into a wolf at night, she thinks Daniel is completely jealous and says, "I hate you, you're ugly." And it's just so cruel. And at that moment, you really do feel sorry for Daniel, and you hate Ilonka so much. But I will say it leads to what I think is the best sequence of the entire movie, the way it wraps up, where they kill all the characters, and I mean all of them. Aside from Dracula getting killed earlier in the movie, Larry Talbot dies, Ilonka dies, Daniel dies, the Frankenstein monster dies, Dr. Niemann dies. They had the balls to kill every single character, and it makes the whole movie that much worth it. I thought it was a pretty bold ending, and also a satisfying one, because we finally give Larry Talbot some peace where he's killed by a silver bullet, and the monster fittingly sinks in quicksand with Dr. Niemann. So the current actor playing the monster dies with the first actor to play the monster in Universal's series. So I say it's worth seeing in your lifetime. This is easily one of the better Universal Monster sequels out there, and I'm actually doing a re-recording of certain sections of this review, because in my original recording I said good but not great, but as time went on, I've started to really grow fond of this movie to where I highly recommend it. It may not be on the level of Destroy All Monsters in terms of a big Universal Monster crossover, and if you're going into this expecting Destroy All Monsters in terms of entertainment value, you're going to be disappointed. But I think the newer characters really elevate this movie to be better than it has any right to be. The same thing cannot be said, however, for House of Dracula, which, if there was any Universal Monster sequel that felt the most pointless, it is this one. Because the plot to this movie is that Dracula approaches a scientist to cure him of his vampirism, but he's only doing that to try to get close to the scientist's assistant. At the same time, Larry Talbot approaches this very same scientist to cure him of his werewolf phase. And you might be wondering, this is a sequel to House of Frankenstein. We saw Dracula die. We saw the Wolfman die. How did these two come back? Well, that's a good question that this movie does not even attempt to answer. It gives no explanation whatsoever on how these two characters are back, and it's even more frustrating considering that later on in the movie, they find the Frankenstein monster, which survived, surprise, surprise, and the bones of Dr. Niemann, And you're like, wait a minute, so now you're bringing in continuity? Another thing that brings this movie down is the fact that it's all over the place in terms of its structure. House of Frankenstein had the benefit of having Dr. Niemann be the thread that carries the plot. Even though Dracula is only in the first act, it still feels consistent. This movie doesn't feel consistent because we're introduced to Dracula in the beginning of the film and what his motivation is, and yet Dracula is just pushed to the side for the Wolfman. And there's a good amount of time where you are watching this movie and you forget that Dracula is in it. And then Dracula gets killed the same way he did in the last movie halfway through. If there's anything that I can at least admire about this movie, I think that while the death of Larry Talbot in House of Frankenstein is more satisfying, it is nice to see him at peace and alive in this movie when his werewolf phase is cured. Again, it's about halfway through the movie, and the rest of it is basically seeing this mad scientist go into a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde phase without actually being that character. And much like with the last movie, the Frankenstein monster is revived at the very end, all hell breaks loose, the monster dies with the scientist, and that's it. There's a reason why I decided to review both these movies in one video, because I had a very difficult time thinking about what I could say about House of Dracula that warrants its own review. Yeah, it's just literally the same movie as House of Frankenstein, but far worse. I would say that this is the Halloween Resurrection to House of Frankenstein's H2O. Both those previous movies had very satisfying endings to their monsters, but they just couldn't let it go and brought them back for one more installment that is easily one of the worst. However, I will not say burn in hell, because there's nothing about this movie that offends me, there's nothing that angers me. It's just a lazy cash grab sequel, and I say don't waste your money on it. At least with something like Ghost of Frankenstein, which I also said was pointless, you had some really entertaining moments throughout it. This movie doesn't have any of that, and I say is not worth anyone's time. And there you go, that's my review for House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula. I hope you enjoyed them. Now, the next movie is going to be the big final send-off for these three monsters in an unusual manner, and I'm talking about Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. More than Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, this is probably the Universal Monster sequel that I have not seen that I was the most curious to watch, and we'll save that review for next time. So thank you guys so much for watching this review, and I want to give a special thank you to my subscribers and YouTube members right over here. You guys are the reason why this channel continues to grow every day, and if you want to help to financially support the channel, you could do so via YouTube memberships for as little as $1.99 a month. But until next time, I want to know what you guys think about House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula. If you've seen them, let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. If you want to find me elsewhere on the internet, you can find me on these social media platforms and my theme park and travel channel right here on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day and take care of yourselves.